Hail Internet, and happy holidays! It's Matt here for the DorkLords. I got my hat. You can see the Christmas lights reflected in the Lord of the Rings artwork triptych behind me. And today, I'll be giving you a holiday sequel of sorts. 2 years ago, I read some excerpts from Tolkien's Father Christmas letters. Right there, right there. I'll put a link to that video in the description. For those who don't know, briefly, for over 20 years, every Christmas, Tolkien wrote and illustrated letters to his children as though the letters were coming from Father Christmas in the North Pole. It's a wonderfully personal gift to his kids. The last letter was written in 1943, when his youngest child, Priscilla, was now a teenager and the kids had aged out of letters from Santa. So the letters that I read 2 years ago focused on Tolkien's connection to his children and the inevitable world building that occurred when Tolkien, being who he was, found himself writing about the same characters year after year and thus felt compelled to create a narrative arc. This year, I'm going to read 3 letters that I did not read previously. And the reason I've chosen these 3 letters is because, while they're not canonically connected to Middle-earth, there are strong parallels in these letters to the events of The Hobbit, and more notably, The Silmarillion. In fact, I found a quote in the Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion citing a letter Tolkien wrote in 1950, in which he mentioned that, quote, "The Silmarillion had bubbled up, infiltrated, and probably spoiled everything which I have tried to write since." Specifically, the quote mentions points of convergence between the Silmarillion and Tolkien's story Roverandom and the Father Christmas letters. So, with that in mind, I give you the Father Christmas letters from 1933, 34, and 41. And I might add, considering he's writing for his kids at Christmas, they've got some brutal, dark elements. We start in 1933. And I should note that Father Christmas's letters contain interjections from his sidekick, Polar Bear, so I will read those accordingly. Cliff House, near the North Pole, December 21st, 1933. My dears, another Christmas, and I almost thought at one time, in November, that there would not be one this year. There would be the 25th of December, of course, but nothing from your old great-great-great-great etc. grandfather at the North Pole. My pictures tell you part of the story. Goblins. The worst attack we have had for centuries. They have been fearfully wild and angry ever since we took all their stolen toys off them last year and dosed them with green smoke. You remember the red gnomes promised to clear all of them out. There was not one to be found in any hole or cave by New Year's Day. But I said they would crop up again, in a century or so. They have not waited so long. They must have gathered their nasty friends from mountains all over the world and been busy all the summer while we were at our sleepiest. This time, we had very little warning. Soon after All Saints' Day, Polar Bear got very restless. He now says he smelt nasty smells, but as usual, he did not say anything. He says he did not want to trouble me. He really is a nice old thing, and this time he absolutely saved Christmas. He took to sleeping in the kitchen, with his nose toward the cellar door, opening on the main stairway down into my big stores. One night, just about Christopher's birthday, I woke up suddenly. There was squeaking and spluttering in the room, and a nasty smell. In my own best green and purple room that I had just done up most beautifully. I caught sight of a wicked little face in the window. Then I really was upset, for my window was high up above the cliff, and that meant there were bat-riding goblins about, which we haven't seen since the Goblin War in 1453 that I told you about. I was only just quite awake when a terrific din began far downstairs, in the store cellars. It would take too long to describe, so I've tried to draw a picture of what I saw when I got down, after treading on a goblin on the mat. Only there was more like 1,000 goblins than 15. But you could hardly expect me to draw 1,000. Polar Bear was squeezing, squashing, trampling, boxing, and kicking goblins sky high and roaring like a zoo, and the goblins were yelling like engine whistles. He was splendid. Say no more. I enjoyed it immensely. Well, it is a long story. The trouble lasted for over a fortnight, and it began to look as if I should never be able to get my sleigh out this year. The goblins had set part of the stores on fire and captured several gnomes who sleep down there on guard, before Polar Bear and some more gnomes came in and killed 100 before I arrived. Even when we had put the fire out and cleared the cellars and house, I can't think what they were doing in my room unless they were trying to set fire to my bed. The trouble went on. The ground was black with goblins under the moon when we looked out, and they had broken up my stables and gone off with the reindeer. I had to blow my golden trumpet, which I have not done for many years, to summon all my friends. There were several battles. Every night they used to attack and set fire to the stores, before we got the upper hand. And I'm afraid quite a lot of my dear elves got hurt. Fortunately, we have not lost much, except my best string, gold and silver, and packing papers and holly boxes. I am very short of these, and I have been very short of messengers. Lots of my people are still away. I hope they will come back safe, chasing the goblins out of my land, those that are left alive. They have rescued all my reindeer. We are quite happy and settled again now, and feel much safer. It really will be centuries before we get another goblin trouble. Thanks to Polar Bear and the gnomes, there can't be very many left at all. And Father Christmas, I wish I could draw or had time to try. You have no idea what the old man can do. Lightning and fireworks and thunder of guns. Polar Bear certainly has been busy helping. And double help. But he's mixed up some of the girls' things with the boys in his hurry. We hope we've got it all sorted out, but if you hear of anyone getting a doll when they wanted an engine, you will know why. Actually, Polar Bear tells me I'm wrong. We did lose a lot of railway stuff. Goblins always go for that. And what we got back was damaged, and will have to be repainted. It will be a busy summer next year. Now a Merry Christmas to you all once again. I hope you will all have a very happy time, and will find that I have taken notice of your letters and sent you what you wanted. I don't think my pictures are very good this year, though I took quite a time over them. At least 2 minutes. Polar Bear says, I don't see that a lot of stars and pictures of goblins in your bedroom are so frightfully merry. Still, I hope you won't mind. It is rather good of Polar Bear kicking, really. Anyway, I send lots of love. Yours ever and annually, Father Nicholas Christmas. So, an eventful year in the North Pole. Goblins versus elves. That might sound familiar. In the end, the good guys win, thanks in part to Father Christmas rallying his allies with his golden trumpet. I'll chat more about the connections to Middle-earth after I've read all 3 letters. Now on to the very next year, 1934. You'll hear the names of Paksu and Valkatuka. They are nephews of Polar Bear. 1934. Cliff House, North Pole, Christmas Eve, 1934. My dear Christopher, thank you very much for your many letters. I have not had time this year to write you as long a letter as 1932 and 1933, but nothing at all exciting has happened. I hope I have pleased you with the things I am bringing, and that they are near enough to your lists. Very little news. After the frightful business of last year, there has not been even the smell of goblin for 200 miles round. But, as I said it would, it took us far into the summer to repair all the damage, and we lost a lot of sleep and rest. When November came round, we did not feel like getting to work, and we were rather slow, and so have been rushed at the end. Also, it has been unusually warm for the North Pole, and the Polar Bear still keeps on yawning. Paksu and Valkatuka have been here a long while. They've grown a good deal, but still get up to frightful mischief in between times of trying to help. This year, they stole my paints and painted scrawls on the white walls of the cellars. Ate all the mincemeat out of the pies made ready for Christmas, and only yesterday went and unpacked half the parcels to find railway things to play with. They don't get on well with the cave cubs somehow. Several of these have arrived today and are staying here a few nights with old Cave Bear, who is their uncle, grandfather, great-granduncle, etc. Paksu's always kicking them because they squeak and grunt so funnily. Polar Bear has to box him often, and a box from Polar Bear is no joke. As there are no goblins about, and as there is no wind, and so far much less snow than usual, we're going to have a great Boxing Day party ourselves, out of doors. I shall ask 100 elves and red gnomes, lots of polar cubs, cave cubs, and snow babies, and of course Paksu and Valkatuka, and Polar Bear and Cave Bear and his nephews, etc., will be there. We brought a tree all the way from Norway and planted it in a pool of ice. My picture gives you no idea of its size or of the loveliness of its magic lights of different colors. We tried them yesterday evening to see if they were all right. If you see a bright glow in the north, you'll know what it is. The tree-ish things behind are snow plants and piled masses of snow made into ornamental shapes. They are purple and black because of darkness and shadow. There is also a special edging to the ice pool, and it's made of real colored icing. Paksu and Valkatuka are already nibbling at it, though they should not, till the party. Polar Bear started to draw this to help me, as I was busy, but he dropped such blots, enormous ones. Hold it up to the light, and you can see where. I had to come to the rescue. Not very good this year, never mind. Perhaps better next year. I hope you like your presents, and be very happy. Your loving Father Christmas. P.S. I really can't remember exactly in what year I was born. I doubt if anyone knows. I'm always changing my own mind about it. Anyway, it was 1934 years ago, or jolly near that. Bless you, Father Christmas. P.P.S. Give some love to Mick and John. Polar Bear. Love. Busy. Thanks. So, we see that with the Goblin War finished, there's less to talk about in 1934. But Father Christmas calls in the elves, the red gnomes, the various bears, and they have a celebratory festival with a giant tree filled with magical lights, suggesting that this is the cause of the northern lights. Again, we'll talk more about the Silmarillion connection in a second. But first, the final chapter in our trio of letters. We jump ahead to 1941. Keep in mind, this is during World War II. The Battle of Britain and the Blitz had recently occurred. So these were harrowing times in England. In fact, Tolkien's son Christopher would join the RAF as a pilot a couple of years after this letter. Another textual note. It seems that in 1941, Priscilla had asked for a book by Alison Utley entitled Moldy Warp the Mole. Alison Utley was a British children's author, alive at that time, most known for her Little Grey Rabbit series, of which Moldy Warp the Mole is a part. She's also known for her novel A Traveler in Time. I looked to see if she'd ever crossed paths with Tolkien, and while she probably did, I didn't find anything of note. Anywho, on with the letter. Cliff House, near Stump of North Pole, December 22nd, 1941. My dearest Priscilla, I'm so glad you did not forget to write to me again this year. The number of children who keep up with me seems to be getting smaller. I expect it's because of this horrible war, and that when it's over, things will improve again, and I shall be as busy as ever. But at present, so terribly many people have lost their homes, or have left them. Half the world seems in the wrong place. And even up here we've been having troubles. I don't mean only with my stores. Of course they are getting low. They were already last year, and I have not been able to fill them up. So that I have now to send what I can instead of what is asked for. But worse than that has happened. I expect you remember that some years ago we had trouble with the goblins, and we thought we had settled it. Well, it broke out again this autumn. Worse than it has been for centuries. We have had several battles, and for a while my house was besieged. In November it began to look likely that it would be captured, and all my goods, and that Christmas stockings would remain empty all over the world. Would not that have been a calamity? It has not happened, and that is largely due to the efforts of Polar Bear. NB, that's me. But it was not until the beginning of this month that I was able to send out any messengers. I expect the goblins thought that with so much war going on, this was a fine chance to recapture the North. They must have been preparing for some years, and they made a huge new tunnel which had an outlet many miles away. It was early in October that they suddenly came out in thousands. Polar Bear says there were at least 1 million, but that is his favorite big number. There were at least 100 million. Anyway, he was still fast asleep at the time, and I was rather drowsy myself. The weather was rather warm for the time of year, and Christmas seemed far away. There were only 1 or 2 elves about the place, and of course Paksu and Valkatuka also fast asleep. The penguins had all gone away in the spring. Luckily, goblins cannot help yelling and beating on drums when they mean to fight. So we all woke up in time and got the gates and doors barred and the windows shuttered. Polar Bear got on the roof and fired rockets into the goblin hosts as they poured up the long reindeer drive, but that did not stop them for long. We were soon surrounded. I have not time to tell you all the story. I had to blow 3 blasts on the great horn, Wind Beam. It hangs over the fireplace in the hall, and if I have not told you about it before, it is because I have not had to blow it for over 400 years. Its sound carries as far as the north wind blows. All the same, it was 3 whole days before help came. Snowboys, polar bears, and hundreds of elves. They came up behind the goblins, and Polar Bear, really awake this time, rushed out with a blazing branch off the fire in each paw. He must have killed dozens of goblins. He says 1 million. But there was a big battle down in the plain near the North Pole in November, in which the goblins brought hundreds of new companies out of their tunnels. We were driven back to the cliff, and it was not until Polar Bear and a party of his younger relatives crept out by night and blew up the entrance to the new tunnels with nearly 100 pounds of gunpowder that we got the better of them, for the present. But bang went all the stuff for making fireworks and crackers, the cracking part, for some years. The North Pole cracked and fell over for the 2nd time, and we have not yet had time to mend it. Polar Bear is rather a hero. I hope he does not think so himself. I do. But of course he is a very magical animal, really. NB. And goblins can't do much to him when he's awake and angry. I've seen their arrows bouncing off him and breaking. Well, that will give you some idea of events, and you will understand why I have not had time to draw a picture this year. Rather a pity, because there have been such exciting things to draw, and why I have not been able to collect the usual things for you, or even the very few that you asked for. I am told that nearly all the Alison Utley books have been burnt, and I could not find one of Moldy Warp. I must try and get one for next time. I am sending you a few other books, which I hope you will like. There's not a great deal else, but I send you very much love. I like to hear about your bear Bingo, but really, I think he's too old and important to hang up stockings. But Polar Bear seems to feel that any kind of bear is a relation. And he said to me, "Leave it to me, old man." That, I'm afraid, is what he calls me. I will pack a perfectly beautiful selection for his poliness. Yes, poliness. So, I shall try to bring the beautiful selection along. What it is, I don't know. Very much love from your old friends Father Christmas and Polar Bear. Message to BB, Bingo Bear, from PB, Polar Bear. Sorry I could not send you a really good bomb. All our powder has gone up in a big bang. You would have seen what a really good explosion is like if you'd been there. So the goblins suddenly attacked in great numbers, emerging from secret tunnels. Father Christmas again calls for aid, using the horn Wind Beam, which sounds like the horn he used in 1933, though he says Wind Beam hasn't been used in over 400 years. And the good guys have to hold off the goblins for 3 days until help finally arrives. So, let's look at some Middle-earth parallels. First, there are some obvious parallels to The Hobbit. A large number of goblins living in tunnels, a huge battle, reminiscent of the Battle of the Five Armies, in which various factions come together to defeat the goblin army. In fact, a line from The Hobbit reads, "Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the north perished on that day." We're told of bat-riding goblins in the 1933 letter. And of course, bats were some of the combatants in the Battle of the Five Armies. Polar bear bears some similarity to Beorn. The 1933 letter says that Polar bear was squeezing, squashing, trampling, boxing, and kicking goblins sky high and roaring like a zoo. In The Hobbit, we get the quote, "In that last hour, Beorn himself had appeared. He came alone, and in bear's shape. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers." There's some Lord of the Rings parallels as well. Father Christmas specifically mentions the Great Horn Windbeam in his 1941 letter. In the Treason of Isengard, which contains various drafts of the Lord of the Rings, one draft has Frodo climbing up Mount Doom, and the quote reads, "Frodo turns and looks northwest, sees the dust of battle. Faint sound of horn. This is Windbeam, the horn of Elendil, blown only in extremity." So this relic found its way into the Father Christmas letters. And it's likely the early version of the Horn of Gondor that Boromir famously uses. One other major connection between the Father Christmas letters and the Lord of the Rings involves the name of Priscilla's teddy bear, Bingo Bear. Again, the Treason of Isengard shows that early drafts of the Lord of the Rings didn't feature Frodo Baggins. Our hero's name was Bingo Baggins, named after Tolkien's daughter Priscilla's teddy bear. Okay, so as for the Silmarillion, remember, Tolkien wrote that the Silmarillion had converged with the Father Christmas letters. And some of the stories I read 2 years ago were introduced to Elvish script. Father Christmas has an Elvish scribe named Ilbereth, very close to Elbereth, the patron Vala of the elves, and so on. But specifically in these 3 letters, I think we see an interpretation of a large swath of the First Age as told in the Silmarillion. First, in 1933, the goblins attempt to ambush Father Christmas, but their attack is thwarted by Polar Bear and the elves. And the Red Gnomes. Gnomes being a term Tolkien used for elves in his early writings. And the goblins are all but wiped out. Father Christmas says, "It really will be centuries before we get another goblin trouble." I think this is an analog to Dagor Aglareb, the glorious battle. Fought in the year 60 of the First Age, the orcs from Angband, in the northern latitudes of Middle-earth, attempted to ambush the elves, but the vigilance of Mithras and Fingolfin paid off, and together they crushed Morgoth's forces, issuing in the Long Peace. In the 1934 letter, now that the goblins have been defeated, Father Christmas calls for a festival, inviting the various factions together at an iced-over pool with a lighted tree to celebrate. I think this is echoed in the Silmarillion's Merith Atherthad, the Feast of Reuniting. Now that feast takes place shortly before the glorious battle, instead of shortly after, but it does seem to fulfill a similar purpose. Here's the quote from the Silmarillion, and note that it's also taking place at a pool, the Pools of Ivrin, which are located in a tree-clad hollow. When 20 years of the sun had passed, Fingolfin, king of the Noldor, made a great feast, and it was held in the spring near to the Pools of Ivrin, whence the swift river Nerog rose, for there the lands were green and fair at the feet of the mountains of shadow that shielded them from the north. The joy of that feast was long remembered in later days of sorrow, and it was called Merith Atherthad, the Feast of Reuniting. And of course, Father Christmas having a giant tree filled with magical light sounds very reminiscent of the years of the trees in Aman, as noted in the Silmarillion, when light was provided by Telperion and Laurelin. Flash forward to 1941. The goblins, seemingly put to rest, burst from their tunnels in a surprise attack that Father Christmas describes as worse than it has been for centuries. This echoes Dagger Bragalach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, which ended the Long Peace, the Siege of Angband, and caused a great amount of suffering. The difference between the two battles is that, in the Father Christmas letters, the good guys win. I think the difference obviously comes down to his audience, Priscilla, and the timing, World War II. I think he wisely decided against the Father Christmas goes the way of Fingolfin route. Although admittedly, Santa versus Morgoth sounds like a cool matchup. So those are my observations on some of the similarities between the two works. I'll end with this very on-the-nose connection to Middle-earth. In 1937, The Hobbit was published. Tolkien's Father Christmas letter that year included this passage. So, I will now send you lots of love, and I do hope that I have chosen the best things out of your suggestion lists. I was going to send hobbits. I am sending away loads, mostly second editions, which I sent for only a few days ago. But I thought you would have lots, so I'm sending another Oxford fairy story. Lots and lots of love, Father Christmas. So there we have a direct reference to The Hobbit, in a meta form, as he's decided not to send copies of his book to his kids as gifts. When he says he's sending another Oxford fairy story, I'm interested to know what story that was. Obviously, C.S. Lewis comes to mind, as his Oxford friend and contemporary, but Narnia was still a few years off in 1937. My theory is that he sent his children the Red Fairy Book. It's a book that inspired Tolkien himself as a child and was written by Andrew Lang, who also attended Oxford. Just a theory. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this reading of the Father Christmas letters and seeing some of their connections to Middle-earth. Happy holidays to everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody! Before I go, I think I might give you a little glimpse of Pippin, a.k.a. Mr. Pickles. He is asleep next to me right here as I record this. I'm going to wake him up. I'm sorry, Mr. Pickles, but I think that you need to see your audience. Ready? Here we go. Good boy. Good boy. Oh, it's a good boy. Who's a good boy? There we go. Hello, Mr. Pickles. Oh, Mr. Pickles. Okay, that didn't work.